Good evening and welcome to Late Edition. I'm Sakal Bhatt. Tonight on Late Edition, we examine the escalating Middle East crisis with a particular reference to current unrest in Syria. The latest being that thousands of Palestinian refugees fled a camp in Syria's port city Latakia, where government troops shelled the dwellings. Syrian forces shelled several people in Latakia yesterday on the third day of a military assault aimed at crushing protests against President Bashar al-Assad. The crackdown coincided with the 1st August start of the Muslim Ramadan fast, when nightly prayers became the occasion for more protests against 41 years of harsh Ba'athist party rule. Syrian forces have already stormed Hama and several northwestern towns in a province bordering Turkey. Thousands of Palestinian refugees, in fact, have fled a refugee camp in Latakia, and some are leaving on orders from the Syrian authorities. And to discuss the Syrian crisis, we have on a Late Edition panel today Dr. Waid Awad. He is the South Asia Bureau Chief of Al Arabia Television. Thank you so much, Dr. Waid, for joining us on Late Edition. I'm extremely glad to have Dr. Sreeram Chaulia, Professor and Dean, Jindal School of International Affairs. Thank you so much. So what's your understanding of these people that Dr. Awad is saying who are trying to hijack the agenda? And having said that, do you think, talking about Bashar al-Assad and the actions that has been demonstrated, we are talking about the crackdown of his protesters, he's slowly losing his legitimacy as far as ruling his own people is concerned?
The protest movement has many shades, and as Dr. Wail just mentioned, there are violent elements among them. And initially it was considered a mystery as to who these were. And then over time, they're still trying to crack this mystery, in the sense there doesn't seem to be clarity as to who's leading them, as to who's funding them. But certainly one can imagine, given the geopolitics of the region, that there is a strong Sunni fundamentalist wave generated by neighboring powers, led by Saudi Arabia primarily, who seem to have cast the die against Assad, and they want him out. And this tension goes back to the old Syrian alliance with Iran. And because there was this long tussle between Iran and Saudi Arabia for control of the region, the Saudis seem to be playing, in fact, a very interesting role. In Bahrain, they actually protected the regime and were part of the counter-revolution against the people. In this case, they are actually siding with some of the anti-government protesters. So you are finding lots of nuances based on sectarian as well as geopolitical calculations of regional powers.
Dr. Chaulia, your quick take on Dr. Awad's statement on the social uprising and how it's been really fueled, if I may use that word, from the external sources. Because at the end of the day, you're losing lives there, lives of people. And what is the kind of consensus that is really building for the government, the current government there?
I think it has certainly eroded its legitimacy. And 40 years is a long time for a dynasty to rule. I think the people also want change. There's no question about that. But it's a question of what is the alternative we are looking at. I think he's hinting at that, in the sense that, as we see also in Libya, we are looking at a very fractured opposition that includes elements that are themselves committing crimes. So you are looking at because dictatorships usually deinstitutionalize the polity and the society. They leave you in a very fragmented condition, and then they try to use this divide and rule game in order to build social base. And what we are seeing in Syria as well as in Libya is a kind of a long summer which is very, very violent, and where there doesn't seem to be much of an alternative to these long-running dictators.
On this note, we take, well, there are two big questions. Can this or will this mark the end of the 4-decade-long Ba'athist rule, and will Syria perhaps witness a smooth transition to democracy? All that and much more as far as the Middle East crisis, the big picture is concerned. We're slipping into a... Do you agree with Dr. Awad? And also now this international outrage, the absence or presence of it, what difference is it really going to make on Assad's regime?
Well, most people think that he will survive, at least for some time. And it looks like there is also a degree of softness even in the condemnation that we have seen from the international community.
Right.
And this has to do with Israel's concerns in the region, because Syria has been seen, even though it's an ally of Iran, at the same time, it was seen as necessary in order to keep the Golan Heights quiet and the Palestinian community residing within Syria quiet and so on. So it is seen as a reliable partner, if not a partner, as a reliable state whose existence will keep the current framework of war and peace intact. What happens if the regime falls? And I think that's why the Obama administration has not explicitly called for Assad's removal either. They may be doing things on the ground, but at least for public consumption, they've been very reluctant to come out openly against this regime. It's very different from, for example, their reaction to Gaddafi. The moment people came out, the Americans, the British and the French decided that he had to go. And it took no more than a few weeks. So I think in the case of Syria, because of its location, because of its proximity to Israel, there are various concerns that come into play. And it doesn't look like any of the international community's major players are actually looking out for people's interests. And it's a betrayal in many ways.
The question is, will he get the conducive environment for the reforms that he's been really there and pressing for?
You see a parallel to this in Morocco. And the king has devolved. And it seems to be working in the sense that the people are off the streets. There were very sporadic protests, and it's not spreading beyond that. So some people have claimed that that is the right way of democratization through negotiation. In fact, throughout history, when you see transitions from authoritarian to democratic regimes, the most successful ones, stable ones, have been through negotiation and transfer of power gradually, rather than through violent upheaval and the dictator fleeing. In that sense, Ben Ali and Mubarak are exceptions to this rule, where overnight they fled, right? But rather it often happens. So you will have to look at the military, the security agencies, the key business elites in Syria, where they are looking at in the long term. Are they convinced that Assad is a wrong horse to bet? And if so, who are they transferring their loyalties to? This is how the game is going to be played for the transfer of power eventually.
But as far as the transfer of powers is concerned, how is the situation really going to pan out from here? We are discussing Syrian unrest and Middle East crisis. What really brings stability given the current scenario? And do you agree with Dr. Awad on this?
Well, we in India know the Gandhian techniques. I think at the end of the day, mass movements based on popular consent and mobilization that do not resort to extreme methods are the only way for peaceful transfers of power to happen. And I think at the same time, regimes often use the pretext of violent and disorderly elements within the opposition to come out no holds barred in terms of clampdown and crackdown, which then again creates a cycle of aggravation. So you have rights abuses leading to dissent, then again and then vice versa. So you need to break out of this vicious cycle of violence and counter-violence that's now on display in that entire Middle East. You need to think about how regional organizations, the Arab League has been a very, very poor show in the whole process. They took some courageous decisions early on in Libya, but then they backtracked, they're highly divided. You need regional solutions backed by the United Nations. At the end of the day, even though it's a politicized body, it's the only hope.
That will make a difference. United Nations interventions in a bigger way.
Even the Arab League decision was a blunder. It's the only historical decision that they have taken unanimously to call for Libya to be. They are calling for division of Libya. Are they protecting the civilian really? 68 persons were killed yesterday, the day before yesterday, in the bombing in Tripoli. What's going on? This is only a cover by the international war to
But don't you see a split in Libyan protest again, since you mentioned this?
No, Libya, there was no opposition. As I said, Al-Qaeda killed the opposite leader, Abdel Fattah Yunus. He was killed by Al-Qaeda. That means Al-Qaeda is fighting along with the rebels. If the rebels are fighting and you are supporting, and you see the Qatari tanks inside territories of Benghazi or in some city fighting side by side, or you see the armed embargo, you're arming rebels, and you are saying that this is a peaceful kind of transition of power. No.
See, we are out of the romantic phase of the Arab Spring. What we're looking at is, crash to the ground realities where dirty politics is being played by various players, and it's muddled. It's like the fog of the post-revolutionary, environment across the region. And increasingly, for some clarity to emerge, it will require, I think, perhaps years, if not decades of churning. And so revolutionary processes often take, long. It's not a moment, but it's rather a series of events and activities and turning points and inflection points. So we may be at one, but when we say inflection point, we are talking about a long, drawn-out battle. So for all we know, months to come, these guys are still in power and they're still fighting it out with their backs to the wall, but still there.
They are fighting. Final word, Dr. Awad, once again, since you belong to the Flashpoint City, Hawa. Now, having said that, the international pressures and all of it, can Syria now at least dream of or move towards the smooth transition to democracy? Can that happen? And Assad, as you mentioned, President Bashar al-Assad hasn't really lost the confidence of the people. There's a lot more left. Final word.
I'm sure the people, I have full confidence in my people in Syria, because we will be going in the direction of the track of democracy and institutional building of democracy in Syria. And I'm sure we will have enough time to heal the wounds that have really led to shed of blood in the street of Syria, whether it's the soldiers, it is a security officer, it is an innocent bypasser or bystander who has had a genuine reason to fight. He's been brainwashed by the other people who wanted to vested interest to destabilize my country. And I'm sure we will be able to come back and bounce back. Syria was the capital of the Umayyad for more than 200 years, the Islamic Empire. And we know how to negotiate, we know how to deal with our own people. Any interference by foreign power in any affairs of the nation, it will ruin, and there is no question about it. It's only transparency and should be open more to the media to see for themselves what is the actual reality on that.
And also from you, Dr. your final word as far as the big picture of Middle East is concerned, we know that if Syria falls, it's a big war. And if we manage to hold it, okay, then what really happens? Because that is also going to have a repercussion on the situation elsewhere in the Middle East.
You will see more and more spillovers now. You talked about the Palestinian refugee camp being shelled. Increasingly, you will find it will have impact on the larger Arab-Israeli peace process. It will have a larger impact on the economies of these regions, which were until recently considered to be growth areas. So North Africa, Middle East, I think will go through a severe rounds of churning, and it will mean more human suffering. But then, at the end of the day, if you want change, it cannot come without struggle. And in many ways, what we are seeing, those genuine demonstrators who are wedded to nonviolence are actually struggling. And I think the international community, people in India, our own government, we should support the genuine cause for democratic change in this region.
On that note, thank you so much, both my panelists, Dr. Sreeram Chaulia, Professor and Dean, Jindal School of International Affairs. Thank you so much for putting it in a larger perspective. And also extremely thank you, Dr. Wael Awad, South Asia Bureau Chief of Al Arabiya Television. Thanks for joining us on Late Edition.